and welcome to Conversations with Matt DeLaughry. We continue our discussion of the hymn and turn our attention now to verses 17 through 18a and the three "and" statements. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together, and he is the head of the body, the church. When we talked about the structure, we said that these three statements really don't fit in either the first or the second main section of the hymn. If you remember, the hymn contains two main sections, along with the middle or transitional section, which is what we're talking about today. This transitional section has some themes from the first verse of the hymn, the first section of the hymn, Christ before all things, and it moves in the direction of the second section, but it really doesn't fit with either of them. However, these verses do belong together as a unit. Remember, though, hymns are highly structured and structure carries meaning. So, why are they stuck in the middle like this? It's not like there's just throwaway material in the middle. If you took the time to develop a hymn like this, you're going to take the time to make it right. This is something that would have been memorized and passed on as official teaching. So, if you're going to take the time to make the hymn as structured as it is, you're not just going to put some random stuff in the middle. I think, however, there's a very specific reason we see these verses like we do, and after we take a look at these three "and" statements and what they mean, we'll come back to that. So the first two statements are, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. The first statement, and he is before all things, repeats much of the thought from the first verse. Christ is before all things takes us back to him being the uncreated creator. We also have another reference to all things, making this point about Christ being supreme over all creation super redundant. But we're nowhere near the end of the redundancy. We're going to see stuff about Christ as supreme over all parts of creation again and again and again. It's almost like the author of the hymn was trying to make a point. So, the second statement, and in him all things hold together. Here we find another all things, so there's that point again. And creation is said to be held together in him. While the statement does talk about Christ's relationship to creation, we find something different. It's not that Christ created everything in the past. He did, but that's what the first line said. Here, he is responsible for something else. The word here, for hold together, really carries the meaning of Christ being responsible for the continued activity in the cosmos. In other words, Christ did not leave his creation to run like a well-designed machine. There's no deist God here. Christ didn't just set things running and then step away to let them go. He is actively involved in creation, not just in the past and the future, but now. Now here's where things get interesting. We have been talking about the cosmos from God's perspective and been looking at things from a very big picture and sort of removed kind of way. In the next statement, humans show up with a reference to the church. So when the hymn talks about Christ's continued actions in the world, all of a sudden the church comes into picture. Let's look at the third statement. And he is the head of the body, the church. In other places in the New Testament, the church is referred to as the body. However, those make the point that every member has a specific function and everyone needs to work together. Here, the focus is on how the church relates to the head of the body, Christ. So right after a statement about Christ continuing to work in the world, we have a statement that Christ is the head and the church is the body. The point that is being made here is that the way that Christ is working in the world right now is through the church. For those of us who are Christians, that should make us stop and think. Do our lives actually look like Christ is working in the world through us? I think a lot of us, if we were to grade ourselves, could easily say needs improvement. Fine, but how exactly do we improve? What does Christ working in us actually look like? When we get to chapter 3 of Colossians, we're going to talk a lot about that. Right now, we're looking at the big picture and talking about theology. The actions we're supposed to perform are based on that theology, so we have to talk theology first. How we live comes later, but we'll get there. For now, what we need to realize is that the way Christ works in the world is through those who are a part of the church, i.e. Christians. Now, if you remember the episode on structure, there's one more thing that is important about these verses, and it's related to Christ working through the church. Verses 17 to 18a are not one of the main verses or one of the main sections of the hymn. Rather, they represent a sort of transition between the two. But, as we said, in hymns, structure carries meaning. These verses explain how we get from the first main verse to the second one. They explain how we get from original creation, which was messed up at some point, to the reconciliation of creation in which everything is put back the way it should be. So, Christ is working to repair what has been broken with creation, and the way he is doing those repairs is through the church. It would be hard to come up with a statement that gave more importance to the church. We are the hands and feet of Christ. Of course, with that, we could also say that it would be hard to come up with a statement that placed more responsibility in the hands of the church. But that's because importance and responsibility are connected. And, if this stuff is actually true, that should make us stop and think. What are we doing with our lives? According to the hymn, if we are part of the church, we have an absolutely enormous responsibility. We are supposed to be fixing what is wrong in the world. It is at this point that I think we should remember what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. I'm quoting now from Matthew chapter 7. "Judge not, that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you use it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." The point of this passage is not, as many people think, to say that you should not judge others. The point is not to be a hypocrite. In other words, when you see something that is wrong with someone else, stop, look at yourself, and ask the question, do I do this too? More often than most of us would like to admit, the answer is yes. The point of this is that before we go and try to fix the world, we need to get our own lives in order first. Suppose we spent the next year doing nothing but sorting out our own problems. You know, the character flaws that we have but really don't want to address. How much better of a job of fixing the world could we do if we were fixed up a bit first? After we remove the log from our own eye, we would be able to see clearly to take the speck out of our brother's eye. So repairing what is broken with the world starts by getting repaired ourselves first, even though there's probably no more unpleasant task in the entire world than that. But if we're serious about doing our job, then that's what we need to start doing. Christ is working to repair the world through us, but, as he said himself, before we can fix anyone else, we need to be fixed ourselves. The only question is, do we take this seriously? And if so, what are we going to do about it?